Okay, so welcome and thank you everyone for attending this first seminar of the current academic year, the 2024-2025 academic year, for our annual seminar series. This session is hybrid, and we thank you for everyone who's shown up in the room and those who have shown up in the Zoom room. We're going to begin by land acknowledgement. So I'm just going to start off by that. We'll begin by giving honour and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations as the traditional inhabitants of the lands where McMaster stands. To say that is to acknowledge a debt to those who were here before us and to recognise our responsibility as guests to respect and honour the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land. This series, the aim of it is that we create opportunities for the exchange of ideas and to stimulate discussion amongst researchers and graduate and undergraduate students, community members, and older adults themselves. And we're very excited to have Dr. Susan Pickard here in person to present her seminar, which is called Diverse Ways of Aging Well, Findings from a Longitudinal Study into Frailty and Minoritized Ethnic Groups in the UK. We're very fortunate that this week we have Susan, along with 4 other colleagues from Liverpool, who are visiting us through a funded partnership grant between the Galbraith Centre at McMaster University and the Centre for Ageing in the Life course at the University of Liverpool. So given we were having this visit, we thought we should really make sure that we get Susan to work hard while she's here. And so we're very fortunate she agreed to give us a seminar as part of the visit. And we're also looking forward to our team returning to having a return visit to Liverpool back in December of this year. So for the presentation, we'd ask that you keep yourself on mute to avoid any background noise. There was a bit of echo to start with, so if people can keep themselves on mute, that would be great. Susan will present for about 40 minutes, and we'll leave the last 20 minutes or so for a question and answer session. This is approximate. And if you have any questions, especially if you're on Zoom, if you want to type them into the chat during the presentation, so we have them there at the end, or you can unmute yourself and ask Susan directly at the end, and obviously everybody in the room will have the opportunity to ask questions too. Okay, so now I'm just going to give a brief biography of Susan. Susan Pickard is a professor of sociology and director of the Centre for Ageing in the Life course at Liverpool University. And her research interests lie in the intersections of age, gender, and ethnicity within a life course perspective, and she's published widely on these areas. She has 2 notable, there's many other research projects, but there's 2 notable projects, one that's funded by the Economic and Social Research Council in the UK, the ESRC, and also the MRC, which is the Medical Research Council in the UK. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming Susan.
Great. Well, it's fantastic to be here and to have such a vibrant and interested audience. Thank you very much for coming. You know a little bit about the project already, because we talked about it a little bit this morning, so apologies for any repetition. And as I mentioned briefly this morning, is actually the focus of this project is about frailty, but during the course of the project, we realised as a team that what we really wanted to tell people about was how one could flourish or age well whilst being frail. So it's a subtle shift, if you like, onto a more positive theme. So that's what I'm going to present here. And I thought that this audience would like to hear, I guess, more of a positive perspective about aging well. So I'm going to start by I'll start by talking about the project team. And the project team is and the presentation will be slightly different, but the project team is composed of 10 permanent members of staff and another 3 research assistants. So about 13 of us as academics and researchers. And then we've also got partners in the community. One of them is the Race Equality Centre in Leicester, and the other is Age UK, and we're particularly involved at their Leicestershire and Rutland office. So it's really important for us to have partners who are on our advisory group as well and are co-producers with us of this work because, we want to be in touch with what's needed out there. And we don't want to just be talking in a way that's irrelevant to older people. And we also have, and I'm not sure that I put this on any of my slides, we also have a patient and public involvement group specifically designed for this project. So we have older people from a number of different minority ethnicities that advise us at regular intervals, and we bring questions to them. So it's very much a co-produced piece of work. So I'm going to start with the concept of successful aging and critique it, because successful aging, I think, it's become quite a dominant way of understanding aging, but it's a very biomedical and clinical interpretation of what aging well is. It's another way of talking about aging well, in other words, but it does so through a framework determined by predominantly objective good health. And when I say objective good health, I mean no indication of any underlying disease or chronic disease at all. So really, it's exceptional aging. It differs from usual aging, which is what most people go through. And then you have failed aging, but successful aging is extremely, it's sort of aspirational, and it's exceptional rather than usual. So it's sort of, our argument is that by defining successful aging in this way, it basically leaves out most older people. They can't define themselves as successfully aging. So it's objective good health plus social productivity and engagement. People have called it a very kind of neoliberal or consumerist model of aging well. It's about being busy and entrepreneurial and showing that you are producing, it's sort of, busy, 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 even whilst you're retired. It's that kind of approach to, if you like, a good old age. And it's a good old age from the outside, because it's kind of measuring things that you can measure as an observer, rather than the inside view, which is asking older people what's important to them and what aging well means to them. So one of the many problems with this term, as it's become so dominant since the term was produced by Rowan Kahn specifically, and others followed in the 80s and 90s, among many other problems, is that flourishing, what we call aging well, in the midst of whatever else you've got going on with you, deficits, if you like, problems, diseases, chronic illness, and frailty, that kind of flourishing is overlooked. It doesn't count as good aging at all. And in terms of minoritized older people, yes, we know that there's a health gap. There's a life expectancy gap, but there's also a gap in terms of how well, how successfully minority ethnic people age. So they're more likely to get chronic illnesses than dominant white groups in the UK and the US, and they're also more likely to become frail earlier. But within the terms of successful aging, that means, it's important to understand this and the reasons for it, of course, but within the terms of successful aging, that means that the health and aging of minoritized older people are only seen in terms of failure. So we thought this was a real problem for us as we came in to look at this. And also there's been real societal changes since this idea of successful aging was coined, if you like. Western societies have seen mass migration, super diversity, and more heterogeneous aging. And the idea of successful aging is based on a very kind of Western idea of what a successful life course, as well as a successful old age, should be. It's this neoliberal, consumerist, busy. It's almost like a Protestant ethic of, not wasting your time because it's not virtuous. It goes way back to the origins of indeed the Industrial Revolution, if you like, if you go back to Weber. So this has been quite well understood by researchers for many years, and so alternatives to successful aging have fallen into one of two camps. Either let's modify what successful aging means, let's build in more things so that other ethnicities and other, more working class, less fortunate people, because it's also, it also very exclusive for exclusionary, sorry, for poorer white people. It's a very middle class white template of aging well. So let's modify it. Let's add other things that might be able to be more inclusive so that more people can feel that they are successfully aging. Or the other camp says, no, this is just no good. Let's throw it out altogether and use alternative concepts. Some of the concepts that have been suggested are things like balanced aging or harmonious aging. You can see that's quite related to kind of Buddhist or Chinese ideas, but people have been floating these ideas around. But successful aging continues as a dominant term. But we realized as we did our research with these different communities that we needed to understand aging well in a much more multi-layered and nuanced way, looking at structures of oppression, looking at poverty and racism and, gendered issues. And of course, because we're sociologists, that's what we do. But also bringing in biographical elements and existential dimensions as well, to have this much more multi-layered idea. So just a bit about some of those concepts I just mentioned. I mean, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this idea of, for example, what intersectionality is, but it's actually a term that's used often very vaguely without much definition, and not very scientifically. So it's a kind of descriptive term that doesn't always add very much to the project or the findings. People state it's intersectional and don't really explore how those different elements work together. So what intersectionality is based on is the idea that you are structured in particular dimensions of power. So you are a particular sex, you're male or female, or you are a particular ethnicity, or you are disabled or not, and so on and so forth. And some of these characteristics serve to oppress and some serve to advantage others, because you're also, you're positioned in some way along this structural axis, which makes, so you've got middle class people there too. So some of these things are not about oppression. They're about identifying where people are on these grids. So they advantage, some of these factors advantage some people. But age has been neglected in terms of these characteristics, even though age is clearly an intersectional factor that we should take into consideration. Very few research studies include age. Very few studies that take an intersectional perspective remember to add where you are in the life course. And it captures difference as well as disadvantage and advantage. So it captures, you may have, experiences, for example, in terms of the people that we're looking at, for example, of migration history, or gendered histories, which are not necessarily oppressive. Sometimes you can use some of these factors to your advantage, because, you learn perhaps from difficulties that you've gone through and you become more resilient as a result of them, or you come from a place that has different ideas about how to do things and it doesn't necessarily oppress you when you migrate somewhere else. It actually gives you a unique advantage in some circumstances. So it's a very it's not an additive concept the way we use it. We're not adding up the number of disadvantages that people have. We are looking at the complex, almost, if you like, it's a mosaic or a kaleidoscope where if you click the kaleidoscope, you can rearrange the pieces in different patterns. And over a biographical trajectory, some elements have more relevance than others. So we found, for example, with our communities of older people, that they experienced a lot of racism when they arrived in the UK. But obviously there's been historical changes over the last 50 years and cultural norms have changed, but also when they find themselves in old age, they can also choose the people that they interact with. And so some people say, well, we don't experience racism anymore. That's because they mainly interact with their own communities, perhaps. So there are different, some things become, when you're reproductive age, for the women in our study, they felt a lot of sexism as well. And that sort of waxes and wanes across the life course. So it's not stationary, it's dynamic. And people's individual perspective, we can understand where they're positioned, but we take the viewpoint that this doesn't determine their responses. It's not like you are therefore structurally kind of obliged to react in a particular way. We do feel that people have choice. It's often called in sociological terms agency. So they can make choices and they can use advantages or experiences that they have, and they can have unique standpoints. So this kind of guards against sort of stereotypical assumptions that you can fall into easily if you just look at someone as a product of power relations. So I hope that that's all making sense. I'm not bombarding you with too much information so far. I think it's going to get easier. And we also realize that, as well as not including age in sort of intersectional perspectives, people don't necessarily realize younger researchers have what we call a youthful structure in terms of their gaze. They make assumptions based on the life stage that they currently are. And so they don't understand that existential issues in old age are very different. It's a unique life stage, in other words, and it can involve, substantial shifts, for example, in experiences of time, experiences in embodiment, how your body feels, looking to the future, and priorities. Things are very different sometimes. Your goals and your values and the things that you find important and meaningful are not the same values that you had when you were in midlife or youth. For some people, they try to hold on to them, but for many people, these shift. And we find this happens to most people. So, and actually, it's very interesting in terms of our minority ethnic communities that we looked at in this research project, because understanding, and for all older people, but understanding the existential shifts that happen in old age can help us to produce different templates and models for the good life. So we can actually find sources of resistance to consumerist neoliberal values that rule the rest of the life course. And so for example, the idea of success, which underpins successful aging, obviously, it's not necessarily a very useful way to understand anybody's experience of old age. And Drew Lader, who's a medical sociologist, who's also a doctor, suggests a number of cross-cultural archetypes of aging that can see positive aging in different terms. So from successful aging. So for example, one of the archetypes that he comes out with, which is cross-cultural, and is much better inclined to understand people from other cultures as well, he calls the contemplative. And you can see this, for example, in very strongly in Hindu culture, for instance, where the emphasis in that part of very much a cultural emphasis that in the latter part of the life course, you move away from the active life into the contemplative life. And it's something that I think a lot of people in Western societies, white Western people, can also relate to. So this sort of, I think, brings a source of alternative values. It can do to everybody. The contributor is another one that he came out with, and the contributor does things and is helpful, but not because they're busy and active and productive in the way that successful aging frames the idea of contribution, but more in a sort of caring dimension, or the wise older person dimension. It's got a very different feel in terms of values. The creative is a model that adapts to change in a creative way, in an imaginative way. And the compassionate companion is somebody that is helpful based on their own vulnerability, so that they can advise and support, but not from a position, a position of sort of, good health or distance from this existential issue of aging and illness, but from their own experience of being vulnerable and having gone through illnesses as well. So these are quite interesting. And as I present the findings, I will show how some people that were in our study fit more naturally into these archetypes than into the idea of successful aging. Anyway, so I'll say this very briefly because I mentioned it earlier, but this particular presentation is going to be drawing on the first stage of a 3-year project, and it's going to be presenting the data that came out of our photovoice methods with the older people, which is when we basically ask people to take photographs of their lives and anything they wanted, which reflect aging well to them and their experiences in age. We involved 6 ethnicities based in a large multi-ethnic city in the UK, which is Leicester: Black African, Black Caribbean, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and White British. The White British were people that were basically many generations British. We realised we probably should have involved Eastern Europeans and other migrants that are also white, but we didn't think of that. We kind of learned it as we went through. We put a very low sort of age range there in order to capture the experience of more disadvantaged communities. As I said earlier, particularly Bangladeshis tend to get ill, chronic illness and frailty considerably 30 years earlier than there's a sort of 50-something is comparable in the Bangladeshi community, is often comparable to 80-something in the white community. And this is partly because of poverty and disadvantage as much as anything else. So we use photographs because a lot of these people spoke English imperfectly, if at all. And we thought it might be, it's well known as a very inclusive method, so people don't need to articulate in sort of great detail verbally, and they could talk about their photographs and we could ask them questions, and sometimes the photographs speak for themselves. So the 73 participants were recruited. 7 groups of participants attended our photovoice sessions, which 2 to 3 sessions. The first session, we explained to people what it was all about. The second session, they went off and did it, and they came back and they let us know if they had any problems. And the third session, they talked about it in groups, and they also chose a particular photograph that they thought was most resonant with their whole experience, if you like, which would then be part of the exhibition that we were putting on. So this took place over 6 months, a bit longer than that, during 2023. And we had a sort of very flexible topic guide, so we could ask people, nudge people along, give them sort of, what does this mean? Talk a little bit about your health. What are the things that support your well-being, and that kind of thing. And cross-cutting themes across all groups included for them very much the importance of religious belief and practice. Faith was extremely important. The white older groups did not have that so much, and that was a problem for them. Finding meaning and purpose, or creating meaning and purpose to their lives was an extremely important element of aging well. A feeling of belonging, so having connections in the community and in their family structure. Intergenerational connection, which didn't necessarily mean with their own family at all, but this was a very important component for many of the people that we talked to. And being heard. Sorry, I've mentioned belonging before. Being heard and valued generally. The idea that what they had to say was worth people listening to. These were all elements that cross-cut our different groups. And what I'm going to do is present some of our findings through 4 vignettes or case studies. And these case studies were selected to include a kind of mix of demographic intersectional characteristics. So we've made sure we've got males and females, we've got different social classes, we've got different faith groups, different marital status, and different health status. So two of these people are they're talking about aging well, and they are, we in another part of the project, we administered a questionnaire to them. So we know about their health objectively. And then we went away separately, different part of the team, analysed the scores. And two of these people are, they fit into the mildly frail category, and two severely frail. And actually, what was really interesting is they're all so full of life and purpose and meaning that people, the interviewers, and plus me reading the transcriptions and looking at the material that came from these interviews, we were all shocked. We did not expect two of them to be severely frail. So it's really interesting, because if you go in with a frailty score and you go in with a health questionnaire and you see that somebody's severely frail, it makes you wonder if that closes down the idea that these people can also be flourishing. So we did it at the end, and it caused huge surprise to us. It shouldn't have really, but it was just the sense that you expect people that are severely frail somehow not to be flourishing in their personal life. It's the kind of model, the biomedical model, that, they can't be flourishing. Well, indeed, they are flourishing. So that was a really interesting finding for us. Okay, let's move. So the first person in our group was, we'll call her Eunice, and all of these are anonymized pseudonyms. She was a very, very interesting, alive, vital woman of 86 who migrated to the UK from Jamaica in the 1950s. She does have a middle-class origin. She went to private school and had what we call the sociological term cultural capital. She had, some confidence, some family backing, and a good education when she came. And she trained as a nurse. And her husband was a professional as well, a legal professional. But she experienced from the start some very difficult experiences of racism. She had her colleagues in the nursing unit asking her if she wore a grass skirt and slept in a tree, for instance. Very upsetting things like that. She had experiences that she worked really hard, but never got awarded the grades that the other nurses got. She had the experience of always being asked to do the worst jobs, and she felt that she had to fight for everything that she got, and she actually did very well. Meanwhile, her husband couldn't get accreditation for his legal work in the UK, and so worked in Jamaica. So she basically brought up their children as a single mother, and he commuted back and forth in a quite a difficult arrangement. Traveling back in the 50s is not what it is today. In the 50s and 60s, you can imagine how difficult that was. And she had an experience of stillbirth, which was also very difficult, because they didn't treat women that had stillbirths and miscarriages very well in the 50s. She nursed her husband with dementia until his death, and she's a lifelong Christian, very much motivated by helping others and fighting injustice where she sees it. That's a lifelong theme for Eunice, although it's changed and transformed in later life. So this is the photograph she chose, which you think, well, why did she choose this? Well, in fact, this photograph coalesces several themes in her perception. So the aids of aging well, the aids and adaptations she's got, her house was filled with them, originally with her husband, but she is not afraid of looking things in the eye and anticipated her own needs. And so she kept them. And so sort of 10 years later, they're coming in handy for her. She feels that her lifelong quest is to have knowledge and to have education and to educate others, and to use that for self-care, for self-advocacy, and for advocating for others. And they're lifelong themes that have subtly transformed in old age. So she experienced difficult things in her working life and went on to be someone that introduced something amazing in the nursing ward. She introduced a room for women that had had a stillbirth. She introduced a little garden where the children, there were a sort of plot where people could go to remember their children. And she became a union leader as well in her profession. And now, during her old age, that remains important to her. So she's constantly sharing information about things like dementia, telling people, you know, educating people, helping people on how to use the internet, you know, very much. And she says that, you know, that the other people, she does it through her church, that people don't know how to navigate the healthcare system. So that's her kind of driving force, and it's extremely important to her. So there's continuity and change there for Eunice, and she gets a sense of being appreciated, being heard. She derives meaning and value and ongoing self-esteem. So that's very, very important to Eunice. In fact, she says that she dresses, when she told us during her conference, the exhibition she attended the exhibition along with most of the other participants, and she shared some information on vitamins with the whole group that she just found out and she wanted them to know. And she says that she dresses professionally when she gets up in the morning because aging is like going to work. It's a serious business. And that's what she said. So that's Eunice. So Charles, a retired 70-year-old doctor from West Africa, he'd moved various revolutions and sort of like dictatorships that were being overturned, and finally made his way to Leicester, where he taught in the medical school. And again, he has a middle-class background, but he actually settled in a very, very humble part of Leicester, where he's never moved on from. So he's a very, very humble guy. And his orientation has always been on helping younger people and focusing on the future since he was young. And the second related lifelong theme for him is adaptability. He's not rigid, he's flexible, and he's had to, and he's learned how to do that well because he's gone through so many different changes in his life. And of course, he's experienced racism, and you know, from somebody that was hoping to be a consultant, he ended up just teaching first-year medical students. But he was, you know, not bitter at that. He made the best of it, and you know, really engaged with his students. So he tells us. So this is the photograph that he chose as depicting aging well, and this is all about adaptability and generativity, forward-looking, helping future generations. And he says, in Africa, in my tribe in particular, if a man is seen in a kitchen, it's a taboo. You're not supposed to go into the kitchen. You are not supposed to start cooking because it is disrespectful to do the work which the women are supposed to do. But that's him doing the potato peeling, and he does a lot of prepping for his wife. He does it outside the kitchen. He's sitting there in his lounge prepping. And he also feels he didn't want his daughter and his son to be deviated into doing housework because he wanted them to focus on their education. It's a very unusual thing for a man like Charles. And he says, don't tell anyone about this, you know, don't tell anyone. This is his pseudonym, so I don't think he'll mind us saying this, but he doesn't want to be kind of not a proper man type of thing, but yet he's done it. So his contribution to cooking and housework, he's very, very keen on ironing. But he's also able to see the beauty, the engineering beauty in the steam iron that he's bought, a very fancy steam iron, and he sees this as being, you know, he's taken it apart and put it back together again, and it's made him feel that he's still connected to his work in some ways. So adaptability and gender roles and generativity come together. And in retirement, he's very much focused on two things. Well, he's always been focused on helping his younger relatives and his children in getting on, but he's also helping doctors back in his home country in Africa through medical education that he does through a charity. And also his sort of magnum opus now that he's retired is he's trying to write a book to help young doctors understand how you think clinically. So that's his magnum opus. And he's been working on it for a number of years. But he also helps his church. Faith is important to him, but rather than praying frequently like Enos does, he helps by practical things. He sets up the lighting and he provides music. And in fact, in the exhibition of the photographs that we had, he came along with a mobile disco and played rumba music, African rumba music for us. I really wanted to contribute in that way. So that's aging well for Charles. This is, you know, they've all of these people, whether they're mildly frail or severely frail, I haven't mentioned their health difficulties very much, but Charles has got diabetes. He's got, he walks with a stick, and he's got a number of chronic other conditions, but that doesn't feature in his presentation of himself in terms of what's meaningful in later life. Amit next, 68-year-old Hindu man, married 50 years. He's from an Indian family that settled originally, oh, that should be Africa, in East Africa. And then he came to Britain after the African regime asked all the Indians to leave. He came to Leicester, set up a small business, basically making clothes. And he's actually one of the, so Enos and Charles on our scale are mildly frail. It's not like nothing. Mildly frail is still significant, and it's severely frail. And he's a number of chronic health conditions, which he didn't really want to talk about. That didn't feature very heavily in aging well for him. And this is the photograph that he chose. I love going and feeding them. When I'm in India, I stay a month and we've got a shop not far from the hotel. So when I go, I always buy coconut cream for them. I love them. Basically, there was a severe break for Amit between his working life and his retirement. In some ways, as we've seen, Enos and Charles were able to make sure there was continuity. They kept some of their interests. But for Amit, you know, he sold his factory and that was it. And there's a very sharp line drawn there. But what has provided continuity, although it's moved to the front of his life where it was in the background, is his Hindu faith and his Indian heritage more broadly. So vegetarianism is part of it, his connection with animals and nature is part of this. And these interests provide some continuity for him. And also help him, you know, he's a very resilient and an engaged individual. His connection with India is still extremely important to him. And he makes this huge effort every year to go back for a month, which is not easy given his chronic conditions. So, yeah, but it's extremely important to him. So that's Amit. Bakul, a 63-year-old Bangladeshi woman, migrated to the UK from Italy 6 years ago. She'd lived in Italy for a decade, working in unskilled occupations, and moved with her husband to the UK for unskilled work. He was doing, I think, worked in a pizza restaurant. And they came via the EU settlement scheme because they had children that had moved to the UK. Very, very limited English, relies on her children, poor health and frailty. She spends most of her time sitting up in one chair in the living room. She doesn't go out. And she sits on that chair all day long. So one of the photographs, which I haven't shown you, is her chair, which is very important to her. Very poor living situation, damp on the walls, a very small kitchen, not ideal at all. But this is the photograph she shared with us. A prayer book and beads are there somewhere, and her medication. And I'll come to the medication in the next slide, but she says, I can't help out in the community anymore, but I pray more to make up for that. I can pray more throughout the day because I'm not so busy as I used to be. So her feeling of contributing to the community was through prayer. But it also structured her day. So her day was structured by the eight forms of prayer, 8 sessions of prayer that she practiced throughout the day, but also by the timed medication that she had to take. So, you know, it was a structured day, but not structure in the way we would see a day. We could easily miss that from the outside and think this poor woman is sitting in a chair doing nothing all day. That is not her experience of what she's doing. And it makes her feel like she's still of value to the community. This was really important. She stressed to us that was active doing for her. That was a form of giving to the community. But also what's really important to her is that she's now a mother-in-law. She lives in a multi-generational community. It's been one of the aspirations of her life to go from being a daughter-in-law, which she was for many years, to being the mother-in-law. And so despite spending all a day in one chair, it feels like a full life to her. Again, this is not, one of the things that we're trying to do with the doctors that we're trying to communicate this to is that if you come with a Western idea of what living well in old age is, you don't see this as living well in old age. You think, what is this? This looks like just severe deprivation and loneliness. And then there are elements of both of those in this. I'm not trying to kind of erase those and have a sanitized version of aging well, but there is a real dimension of meaning and purpose here too, which need to be recognized because then they can be supported. So, one or two little things can bring everything tumbling down for these people if they lose them. So sort of drawing some general conclusions from this, because I need to wrap up, I think, in 3 or 4 minutes. So we can say for every individual in this presentation of aging well, that there is a unique combination of continuity and change in this life course. So in terms of Drew Lader's, what I think are really positive archetypes of aging that are really different and provide something very different to the busy, active, successful model. Enos fits with the contributor archetype, also with the compassionate companion. If you remember what those are, these are based on employing one's own vulnerability to understand others and to help them in ways that they find meaningful. Charles, again, is also a contributor, and he's a creative. He's managed to adapt really well at each stage of his life, which, I should say that, yes, we have objective health conditions here, but what's really important and interesting to mention is that subjective health, how you feel, is as important an indicator of outcomes, what's going to happen to you in terms of the frailty experience, hospital admissions, as objective conditions are. So it's really important to understand this. Amit and Bakul are both severely frail, probably more aligned with the contemplative, but faith is important to all of them in different ways. And I think that's one of the ways that really stood out in terms of how they differed from the white community that really did not go to church and didn't have this sense of meaning in their lives. If they have meaning, they have to create it for themselves. And all feel as if they're flourishing, even though some of them are in what we call the third age, which is the kind of the age that's a bit more like midlife, middle age. And some of them are in the fourth age, which is a sort of idea that they, decline and senescence and the sort of the stuff connected with old age that you don't want to have happen to you, but they all feel like they're flourishing. So these divisions don't really count here. And if you put people in categories, you can often miss these important things. So policy and practice, because we don't want to do this for fun. We want to make a difference. We want to help people, especially doctors and family members and social health and social care professionals. We want to make a difference to what they do. So in place of the template of successful aging, we want to offer diverse images of flourishing in later life so that people, when they have interactions with older people, don't come with a fixed idea in their head of what a good old age looks like. And so we want to stress a more heterogeneous and diverse notion of what it is to age well. Yes, we only had small numbers of people. We can't make, we didn't have hundreds in our sample. We only had about 10 in each group. So, and with the difference in sort of like socio-demographics within each category, it makes it very hard to draw absolute generalizable conclusions. But still, I think one of the conclusions, as I mentioned earlier, is that if you assume you know something about this old person, you're probably wrong. And so it's so important to hear from them. So what we intend to do in the rest of the project is we're interviewing them now. We've got to the second interview. We're doing 3 longitudinal interviews. So we did 1 set of interviews last year. We're finishing the second set this year. We'll do a 3rd follow-up. We want to look at how these elements shift over time in relation to each other. And what are the factors that make them shift? What keep people feeling like they age well? What are the factors that make them feel they're no longer aging well or flourishing? And how they relate to each other and to changes in social and material circumstances, including their health. So it's not just health. It's a lot of factors here that we're looking at. So interim findings, if you like, but happy to take questions, hear your thoughts, reflections, observations. Thanks very much for listening.
Much, Dr. Pickard, for such a thought-provoking and engaging talk. And I can definitely say for myself, it did challenge some of my previous assumptions about aging, especially with some of the examples that you provided.
Good.
So with that said, we'd like to turn over the floor to questions, both in person and virtual. So we'll kind of take turns swapping between both. We'll start with in person if anyone has any questions for Dr. Pickard.
I wrote down one thought when we were talking about the Bangladesh person and illness.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this would even be within the scope of your research, but I am wondering if the effects of previous colonization have any effect on any of their, particularly their illnesses, years. I'm wondering if it does there, and if you might also see it in other people who have also been colonized. I don't know exactly any relevance.
Well, we're certainly interested in doing, we really believe that you can't look at old age outside the life course. Somebody's had a whole life course. And so what we'd like to do is what we call an intersectional life course approach. So we want to look at some of these effects like migration, like the experience of living in a previous British colony and moving to Britain. We want to look at that throughout the life course. So, I mean, it clearly kind of plays into migration and experience of migration, and different waves of migration have different experiences too. People that migrated 50 years ago compared to people that migrate 5 years ago have got different experiences. So I think that kind of thing we want to capture through people's narrative life histories. So we want to hear their stories, and we want to very much to position this within a life course.
Yeah, I think, if I just may add too, I think the same thing happens almost in the reverse, in the sense of the subjugation of our own native peoples here too. It seems to me that it would also bring that same.
Well, I mean, it's very hard to prove and to find the evidence.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are suggesting that racism is a factor that causes poor health throughout the life course, but also in old age. And not direct racism, like calling people names, excluding them from meetings, but not employing them, not giving them chances to, and the kind of structural things that stop them from, so some of these people weren't able to use their skills and expertise because of accreditation issues and also, Charles said that as a doctor, he says, as a black man, I have to tell you, I wasn't taken very seriously.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's really, we want to hear their stories. We don't want to produce, you know, this is the evidence because we've measured the evidence. We want to hear their perceptions of this. And it's the best way that we can actually access this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you.
Any other questions?
An observation, you had differentiation between blacks from Caribbean
Yes.
and blacks from Africa. I don't recall in my lifetime ever seeing the distinction there. Is that something
Yeah.
that's-
Yeah, it's a demographic category in terms of when we look at ethnic populations in the UK, these are the specific demographic. And in Leicester, these are the most prevalent. Yeah, so it's they are treated very distinctly.
And even in Hamilton, there's the Afro-Caribbean Canadian Association, which is people who are Canadian from the Caribbean, and then there's another one organization that represents people who are originated from Africa. So even if there's, I don't know, just on the top of my mind, what the census categories are for Canada, but even if I imagine it will be a difference too, but even in terms of the communities organize themselves and support each other, we see things differently.
Yeah. I mean, we recruited these people from, as I said, faith groups and lunch clubs and community centres, and they are separate for both these categories. They you know, there are specific groups and specific churches that African people go to and different ones that Caribbean people go to. Sometimes there's a bit of mixture, but certainly the lunch clubs were organised for the different categories separately.
I've never seen anything research in Canada or specifically to Hamilton or whatever to have such a distinction in the
I think, I mean, in some ways they're false categories, but if you're going to sort of influence policy, you have to, it's a good idea to keep to the categories that policymakers use. Hi.
Thanks for a wonderful talk. I was thinking about a postdoc who was at McMaster long ago, Carly Whitmore. I don't know if you know her. She did some work on something she termed the well-being paradox.
Right.
Or maybe she didn't determine that, but I was just looking up the paper she had to write. The idea was that some people are subjectively, aging well or they feel good, but objectively they have a lot of frailty symptoms or multimorbidities, and so what differs among the people who subjectively feel great, even though they have the same sex setup. And so you refer to that.
Yes.
So she used a big data set, the Canadian Study.
Yeah.
Look at that, and I think she comes into some sex differences for one and some other things that Mary had thought about. You ever heard that expression, the well-being paradox? Do you think it's still that westernized medicine and a bit problematic?
Definitely, because I mean, absolutely. And then there's the concept, there are other concepts like salutogenesis, Aaron Aronofsky, that's it's about it's a different definition of health, but that definition can be traced more to people's outcomes. So the definition of health that Aronofsky back in the 70s, I think, defined was that biographical continuity, a sense that you were able to keep your identity through and the things that were of meaning and value to you through the different, different health crises that you experience and through the life course. But when you look at frailty, so frailty, people don't realize, I don't think, often, that frailty is not a static concept, it's dynamic. You can go back up the frailty trajectory. You could, so you've got pre-frail, or the different scales do it differently, but you've got, among other things, pre-frail, mildly frail, moderately frail, severely frail, and perhaps extremely severely frail or something, 4 to 5 categories. And you can, the tendency is, if we don't know what's going on, is for somebody to keep going down. But you can go back up. But when you get to a certain point, like sort of moderately frail, it's much harder to go back up. If you get people when they're mildly frail, it's easier to help them go back up to pre-frail, if you like. But one of the findings that sort of interviews with older people and sort of, you know, real explorations in lived experiences has found is that what's called the frailty paradox, actually, is that people at some point on that frailty journey give up. It's often because somebody important to them dies or moves away, or something that was very important to them they can no longer do. Maybe they've had a fall, they lose their confidence, the world starts shrinking, and that leads to extreme frailty. It's entirely, you know, but if the person is supported to have some kind of, the things that are important to them can be maintained in their lives, they are not so likely to just go into that frailty paradox and end up basically being admitted into hospital and then dying. So it's very, very much about the social and existential dimensions that you need to intervene in at that point to stop someone progressing to severely frail. But if we view health in a medical model, we kind of miss that. I mean, Rockwood is a doctor up the road in, where is he based, Anthea? Sorry? Ken Rockwood. Yes. So, you know, obviously his deficit model, more than the Linda Fried model, but his deficit model can take on board some of these elements because you add up all the things that are not working in someone's life, the deficits. But it's a very negative way of understanding where someone is. You can also look at the things that are working for them and how you support those to be maintained in their life. So health, the sort of etymological old English version, what it means is wholeness, and the sense of I am still a whole person with my identity. You know, the way I see myself, my selfhood is still there. It's a wholeness. But the clinical definition of health is something much narrower. So I'm not saying for a minute that we throw out the role of doctors, but I'm saying that we need to also understand these wider dimensions.
I have a follow-up kind of connected question. Is everyone on Zoom able to hear me okay? I hope. Yes, okay, perfect. So the research that I'm familiar with in Canada, there's this term called the healthy immigrant effect. And refers to the immigrants being healthier and lower mortality rates compared to you know, Native Canadians.
Yes.
So did you see any similar patterns in the study or any other study?
I know that effect exists, but some of these older people migrated later in life and came because their children had chosen to migrate. So it's a little bit more layered. But I would say that in terms of the healthy migrant effect, this idea that migrants are the most go-getting people in their communities, otherwise they'd stay behind, they choose to go. I'd say that it was very much connected to their sense of resilience, because they all had health problems, but they, I think this whole sense of can do and not being destroyed by those could be a version of the healthy migrant effect. We don't have enough, we can't really say this, but we can definitely suggest people like Enos, total go-getting. She's 80, I think she's 88 now. She was at the exhibition and she is remarkable. And that could be, but she also learnt those skills. So she had lots of hard knocks and learnt them. So that's the other thing of Antonovsky. Health and resilience are really important. So you can have too many hard knocks earlier in life and it's really bad. but you need to have just the right amount of hard knocks. If you have none, then when dark things happen to you and, you know, crises strike, you have no resources. And that's often what I see when I've done other research projects where there's some very privileged older people involved who are not aging well because they've never had problems in their life. And suddenly, I remember the managing director of an oil company that I went to interview in the Lake District, and I drove for ages when I entered his gate, all the way around, and finally a mile later arrived at his house. He was that sort of demographic, and he was aging terribly. He was not used to weakness. He was not used to a body that let him down. He was fearful and anxious and riddled with insecurities about the future, and he wasn't flourishing. So you could say, you can kind of, I mean, but these are such small numbers, but you can see some trends here. And he wasn't focused on helping others either. Funny that, isn't it?
Do we have any other questions or comments for Dr. Picard? Yeah.
I have another one if nobody else does, but I have one last.
Please go ahead.
Okay, it's just one other thing that has crossed my mind too. And, you know, and it comes from, you know, interviewing and dealing with Black people from different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wonder if any of the studies you're doing have reached out at all to the LGBTQ community, because they have aging there is not a necessarily easy thing or a good thing for them. And because, not just because of discrimination because of sexuality, but in part because of their needs, and in a society which talks, well, I belong to a group, CARP, Canadian Association of Retired Persons,
Sure.
but in everything they send out, everything they publish, it's assumed that you're married with a partner.
Yeah.
And yet there are legions of people that do not have, are not in that, whether they're LGBTQ or not, they don't have that.
Yeah.
But the LGBTQ community, they don't have very often safe places where they can live, where they can work in a church or any of these other things. So I wonder if you've had any interaction with them or bringing them into any of this at all.
Not into this particular project. And I don't think this would be very common in a sort of public way in the communities that we're talking about. But as I agree, it's really important work. The concept that is used is heteronormativity. So the idea of aging in a way that supposes all these milestones of having children and grandchildren and being partnered with a opposite sex is alienating and very unhelpful. So I think it's exclusionary, absolutely. But I think in a way it's related to what we're doing, because we're wanting to look at diverse models. There's this idea, one size fits all, of what it looks like to age well. So we're concentrating more on the kind of ethnic deviations from that model, but there are many other, so there's no one way of aging well within any community.
No.
And so I think this contributes, I hope that the study will contribute to the very important aim of making people understand that almost the older you get, the more unique you are. So assumptions and generalizations and stereotypes absolutely do not apply. I mean, I've got another study going on at the moment, and my fantastic PDRA is on the Zoom call here, and that's looking at menopause in a similar way. It's looking at Black women and Chinese women in Liverpool and their experience of the menopause as being very, very different to the menopause as framed in biomedical terms, which is a Western model again. And then, of course, when you dig deeper, there's a huge variety of experiences of menopause within the Western white population too. So it's a case of, I think, appreciating there have to be some generalizations. That's how That's how we work as human beings. It's a sort of shortcut, but we have to realize that these are, you know, hiding a very complex and rich, multi-layered experience of difference beneath that. So there isn't one menopause, there isn't one way of being frail, there isn't one way of aging well, and nor should we have these ideas in our heads as to what they look like or what they should comprise.
Well, so much of it, of course, comes out in media and advertising.
Of course,
It's
yes.
such a huge influence on what we think and say.
Yeah.
And do.
Well, thank you, Dr. Picard, for your wonderful talk. And on behalf of everyone at Gilbrea, everyone in the room, and everyone that's joining us via Zoom, thank you so much for your time. And we're gonna end it here. But I know for some people in the audience, if you do have a few more questions, I'm sure you'll be around for a few minutes and can answer some. But we're gonna end the seminar here. So thank you, everyone, very much, and hope everyone has a great afternoon. We'll give one more round of applause. Thank you.